Hello there, hello everyone. Great to have you all join us for this fifth episode of GAIN's Interview Cruncher. Today we're going to be looking at the Food Systems Dashboard 1 year on. It was launched last year, June the 1st, as a national database looking at all components of food systems at a country level. And now it has more than 200 indicators looking at the everything that drives food systems, components, outcomes, drivers, to give information at a country level on food systems. So we're going to be taking a closer look at that. We're also going to be looking at the Food Systems Countdown Report, which is an independent monitoring framework which very much complements the Food Systems Dashboard. And we're going to be looking at how that plays into the upcoming Food Systems Summit, the UN Food Systems Summit. So before we dive in, I'm going to give you a couple of housekeeping rules. First of all, today's webinar is going to be translated in English, French, and Spanish. So if you want to listen in any of those languages, simply click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, select your preferred language, and voila, literally. We are also going to put lots of questions to our panelists. They are poised and raring to go. So if you do have any questions that you want to ask them, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and at the appropriate time, we will get through as many of them as possible, I promise. I'm Shuli Ghosh. I'm going to be your moderator for the next sort of 90 minutes. We have an exciting discussion ahead of us. Let me quickly trot you through our guest speakers. We have some great speakers today. We have GAIN's Executive Director, Lawrence Haddad. We have Ty Beal from GAIN's Knowledge Leadership Team. Rosalind Reymans from the Alliance of Bioversity International and the International Centre for Tropical Agriculture. We have Olutayo Adeyemi, an independent nutrition expert from Nigeria. We've got Kate Schneider from the Berman Institute of Bioethics at Johns Hopkins University. And we're also going to be getting first-hand views from member states, Guatemala and Germany. So let's get going. I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, Lawrence Haddad, GAIN's Executive Director and leader of the UN Food Systems Summit Action Track 1, the dashboard first developed by Lawrence in collaboration with Jess Banzo and other colleagues at the Johns Hopkins University. Lawrence, welcome. So you're obviously one of the driving forces behind the dashboard. Just explain why there was a need for it. Why is it important?
Hi, Shirley. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Well, you mentioned the UN Food System Summit, and when you look at the number of solutions that were generated and submitted to the different action tracks, there are at least over 2,000 solutions that were submitted to us. And why is that? Well, it's because the food system is a pretty complicated space. Think about all the choices that could be made from the input side as to what inputs to choose to grow which foods on which land, how to store it, how to preserve it, how to transport it, how to process it, how to manufacture it, how to advertise it, what choices households and individuals make the food, the impacts that all those choices have on health, environment, and life.
Lawrence, you're freezing a little bit for me. I don't know if you're freezing for everybody else. I wonder if we might be able to hear you better if you turn your video off so we can just hear your audio. Okay, Lawrence, what we're going to do is get you to dial back in. Why don't we move across to Ty Beal, because I know that Ty can also explain about the dashboard, and then we can come back to Lawrence once he once he dials in again. Don't you love modern technology? It's brilliant. It really is. So let me introduce you to Ty Beale. He is research advisor in the knowledge leadership team at GAIN. Now, we have to wait for your photograph, Ty, because we all look so much better on those lovely stage photographs. So it's a shame if the audience don't see that. Ty, welcome. So walk us through the dashboard, how it works, and some of the key indicators that are available.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. And I'm just going to pull up the dashboard live here so we can take a look. Of course, we don't have too much time, but I do want to give you a general overview of the different areas of the dashboard. So what's really important about this dashboard is that it's the first of its kind to put all data together around food systems. So oftentimes data exists around different aspects of the food system, maybe nutrition and health indicators, agricultural indicators, etc. But what we've done here is put all of those indicators together so you can view them at the global level, you can compare across countries and regions and over time. So when you get to the main dashboard, you have three main areas. I'm going to start on the right side here for policies and actions. This is really some tips and best policies and actions to make an impact to transform the food system. And so you can see in different sectors here, I'm just going to do a quick example on number 5. It says support the production and consumption of nutritious indigenous crops through agro-diverse cropping systems, agricultural extension, breeding programs, subsidies, land tenure rights, regulatory protection, market development, and public awareness. So this can help increase availability and appeal of nutritious foods to producer households and all other populations. And so I won't spend more time there, but you can view all of the different recommendations on that page. Country profiles can take you to a specific curated set of indicators for one country, or you can select a region as well. And I'm not going to spend much time here either, but you can kind of go through a different set of indicators across the food system. Where I'm going to spend the bulk of the time here is on a section called Compare and Analyze. And this is really where you can view any of the indicators across the dashboard. And so this has, at the top, you can see different links. So we have indicators on drivers of food system change, like the environment and climate change, which Ro will go into more detail later. Food supply chains, food environments, individual factors, consumer behavior, diets and nutrition, and the environment. And so what I wanted to highlight really quickly here is an indicator we have from Euromonitor data. So if we go to product properties, we can see the retail value of ultra-processed food sales per capita. Now, this is an indicator of ultra-processed foods, which are typically very processed, have refined ingredients, a lot of additional ingredients that you don't have in your home. And what they often do is kind of facilitate overconsumption, have been associated with NCD risk and mortality. So you can see from the map, the darker areas have very high values here. And so what's kind of interesting to see is that, yes, ultra-processed foods are higher in North America and South America and Europe, Australia, and a few other countries here. But what's very interesting is that it's actually increasing differently in different countries. So if you go into growth in retail value of ultra-processed food sales, you can see quite a different picture here. The growth is actually increasing pretty rapidly in Africa and in Asia. So one other interesting thing about the dashboard I'll show, this is the last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the value, retail value of ultra-processed foods per capita. And I'm going to go to the bubble view here. And this may look complicated, and it is, but I'm going to show you just an example here. On the y-axis, I'm going to look at the share of energy from starchy staples. And this is really an indicator of dietary diversity, how many different food groups, which can be indicative of a healthy diet and also nutrient adequacy. And on the x-axis, I'm going to go to an indicator of purchasing power, which is on the individual factors. And let's see here, economic, final consumption expenditure per capita. And so what we can see, what you're looking at is on the x-axis, you can see as purchasing power or income increases, you have a reduction in this share of dietary energy from starchy staples. And what that shows you is that diets are actually getting more diverse, and there's going to be better nutrient adequacy in general. usually more animal source foods and some more diverse vegetables. But what also happens, you can see from this, the size of the bubble, the intake of ultra processed foods increases. And so you can see there's sort of this double concern. You have some positive aspects of that transformation of the food system and some negative. So I'll leave it there, but that's just a little taste of the dashboard.
That's really interesting. So you can use, countries can access various factors and see how they impact on other factors like types of diet and food consumption expenditure. What about, I know that one of the things that you're currently developing is subnational data, which really gives a whole new level of detail, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. And we get that question all the time. You know, where is the subnational data? We want to see in different provinces, the different districts, what's going on. And we do have that that in process right now in a few countries, and we really want to expand that and build it up. And so what that will give is really a more nuanced, granular look at these different variables across the country, the landscape subpopulations within the country, different by maybe economic, by income, by wealth, by men and women, etc.
And this really will help clarify where a country needs to concentrate in order to shape policies which will improve their food systems, which of course is the final goal.
Exactly. You don't generally have consistent data across a country. And so some areas may struggle with different issues, and really having insight into that, I think, is where it's kind of key for countries to have policies that can address it, what's appropriate for the population of interest.
Excellent. Well, Ty, I know we're going to speak to our speaker from Nigeria about the ins and outs of the subnational data. For the moment, thank you very much indeed, Ty Beale. Mm-hmm. So we can now return to Lawrence Haddad, who we lost earlier, but I think by the magic of technology is back with us. And Lawrence, we were just listening to Ty explain about the kind of indicators that are available on this dashboard. Why is this so crucial for countries? Why do they need these indicators? Because presumably they already have access to certain amounts of data in their own countries.
Well, you know, I was saying food systems are complicated. And if you're a policymaker, you know, we had 2,000 ideas submitted to us from the UN Food System Summit. And we've, between the action tracks, we've managed to boil that down to 50 areas. But that's still, 50 is a lot. You know, if I'm a policymaker and I want to know what to do to make my food system generate more health and environmental goods, and more resilience and more jobs, where do I start? I can't do 50 things all at the same time. I have to start somewhere. So the dashboard is brilliant at describing a food system, helping us diagnose where a country's food system needs a bit of support and a bit of strength, and then figuring out what to do about that. So it's brilliant for that. And you rewind 6 years ago when we were doing Jess Fanzo and I were doing the Global Nutrition Report along with Corinna Hawkes, and there was a chapter in that Global Nutrition Report on food systems. It was one of the first sort of chapters in the nutrition space on food systems, and it's very data driven because the Global Nutrition Report is a data driven report, and we were trying to find data on food systems, and we just kept having to look all over the place, and so at that point in time we said, at some stage in the future, there needs to be a food systems dashboard. So when you have to look for 30 or 40 different places, that's not too bad for a researcher, although it's not ideal. But for a policymaker, it's a non-starter. So that was the idea. It was very simple. Bring together all the essential data on food systems into one place. Make it easy to access. Make it quality filtered. You can't, you know, put junk in there. It has to be good, and it has to be relevant, and it has to be use oriented. It's data that's going to help you make decisions to make your food system better.
Yeah, you need reliable data for better decision making. Who's using it? What kind of buy-in have you seen from countries?
Well, obviously lots of researchers are using it, which is great, but more and more policymakers are using it, which is wonderful. We had a competition about 9 months ago to say who was using it the most creatively. And there were 3 or 4 country entries, which are great from policymakers. 2 of the winning entries were from teachers, interestingly, teaching in Kenya and in Iowa, teaching children around the age of 11 about their food in their country and where it comes from. Very interesting. In the context of the Food System Summit, we've had tremendous interest from the member states who are involved in the Food System Summit. You talked about subnational dashboards. So many countries want subnational dashboards, and I think that's excellent. That's really going to help us. And the dashboard, of course, is helping other things become possible, like the countdown that Kate will tell us about. So it's very exciting, and it will keep getting better and better with better data, and more easy to use data.
Yeah, and one of the things we talk about with databases and data systems is how do we future-proof them? How do we make it so that they can still continue to evolve as the way we get our information evolves?
One of the things we want to do, as Ty said, is make it more disaggregated. Another thing we want to do to make it future-proof is to make it more dynamic. At the moment, most data are updated once a year, if we're lucky. That's way too slow for most events. Most economic data are updated daily or weekly. We need to get more dynamism, and so we'll be looking to engage with partners who are expert in that. So bringing in some more big data, things that are routinely collected via platforms like Google, and then more selective, targeted things that we can collect through partners like Premise, where we can go out and say, we need to know how many markets in Ethiopia, how many food markets in Ethiopia are open at the moment, and we'll get that answer within 2 weeks.
That's excellent. So very quickly, 1 year on, it's been quite a growing period within that year. It seems to have expanded massively. Is this the way you expected it to go over the past year?
Yeah, I did, because we have such a great team behind it. It's a great multi-institution team, multidisciplinary team. Everyone's got different strengths and weaknesses. And I kind of have a lot of faith in that team, and really the teams at Hopkins and Gain and FAO and a whole range of people, they've done a great job of pushing this forward, and the summit has also given it an additional impetus as well. So I'm not terribly surprised. I think the big challenge for it will be in the next 3 or 4 years. We're kind of scrambling around for money to keep it going, and we're doing it. But we really need some serious investment over the next 5 years.
Well, it does seem to be a resource that is immensely useful for countries looking to transform their food systems. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you very much indeed for that, and for battling through the technical problems there. Let me introduce now our next speaker, Rosaline Reymans, Senior Scientist with the Alliance of Bioversity International and the International Centre for Tropical Agriculture. Rosalind, welcome. So as we've been hearing, this dashboard is constantly evolving, isn't it? New indicators, new factors being added. The indicators your team has brought to the table are the environmental ones, which are so important. Talk us through the environmental dimension of the dashboard.
Yes, thanks very much, and very happy to be here also. I'll share just one picture, and I hope you can see my screen. Because as Lawrence was saying, the food systems are complicated, and also the environmental dimension of it is complicated. And there are many data out there, but they are scattered and available at different scales, etc. So the approach we took was also to really bring together 5 environmental dimensions that are critically impacted by and also impacting the food system, and where there is also a real need for change in direction globally, as well as at different scales, at the country scale, at the subnational scale, etc. So we grouped different indicators in these 5 different environmental dimensions that are so interconnected with the food system. This is climate, land use and soil health, biodiversity, water use and pollution. And you see kind of in these graphs kind of the change that we actually need. And with the food system, we are able to bring indicators together on that and help monitor or track that change over time. And we also, with bringing these into the food systems dashboard, we show the connectedness more between the food systems and our environmental context and our environmental dimensions. And often I think when people think about food and environment, they might think mainly around greenhouse gas emissions and how that is impacted, or how climate change impacts our food system. But there are also these big other domains like biodiversity, pollution, water use, and also land use that are so much impacted by the food system, and that are also impacting the food system. So with bringing these different domains in, we really want also to show the multidimensionality of it, and how they are interconnected with the food system.
I was going to say all those things: climate change, biodiversity, and greenhouse gases, really important. And as you say, linking to other indicators on the dashboard.
Yeah, so we made an initial selection for each of these domains of indicators that were available for a broad range of countries, and that we could also communicate at the national scale, because some of the environmental indicators are so contextual that when you aggregate them at national scale, it's very difficult to say something about it. So, but these more indicators at kind of a subnational scale, we will also be excited to bring those in once we move to these subnational dashboards that also Ty and Lawrence were talking about. So when you go now to the dashboard, you will see these kind of different types of environmental indicators reflecting these different domains. And you will also see them that some are focused at the consumption level, for example, per capita greenhouse gas emissions of consumption, per capita biodiversity impact of consumption. Some are focused more at the production level, and some are at the drivers or the risk level, like overall climate risk, also soil erosion, etc. Of course, there is this feedback loop, and that the dashboard shows that also very well. In addition to specific indicators for each of these domains, we also brought in a couple of aggregated indicators that cut across these different domains and are easy kind of as an entry point to link the environmental dimension to all these other dimensions that are described on the dashboard and for which you can find data on the dashboard. So you can start with one of these aggregated indicators, link them and compare them to other, for example, food environment indicators that Ty showed, or consumption indicators, and then go more deeper into the domains where there is interest or where you see some red flags.
So this is how users can explore the environmental dimension of the dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. It depends of what the main domain of interest is, of where they can see some problems. You can start from specific domains, or you can start from these aggregated indicators and then go more into depth in each of the domains. And then I would definitely also encourage the users to look at these bubble charts that Ty showed and use one of the environmental indicators and how this links to changes or to patterns in, for example, consumption or production or drivers and food environment. So I think the dashboard is also a first place where it's made interactive to do that, to link these indicators with each other and explore patterns.
Yeah, and just briefly, I mean, clearly the reason why you've added environmental dimensions is because this is becoming a growing priority for both policymakers and consumers.
Yeah, definitely. And this year, it's kind of this year of the summits, but you have the UN Food System Summit, but we also have the Convention of Biological Diversity this year. We have the new COP Climate Change Climate Conference. So, and it's intriguing how that all comes together via food. And for example, also these graphs, they show kind of goals that are highlighted in these different conventions, like the bending the curve of biodiversity is central in the Convention of Biological Diversity. For example, the climate change, the bending the curve on the greenhouse gas emission is central in the climate change COP. And that is all linked, of course, to also the Food System Summit. And we hope that the dashboard can also help bring these dialogues together in that way.
Rosalind, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about this later on. For the moment, thank you for sharing your screen and thank you for explaining that for us, Rosalind Remans there. So we've been talking about how the dashboard can help countries better understand the nutrition landscape and what can be done. Let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. I'm very happy now to introduce Olutayo Adeyemi, an independent nutrition consultant in Nigeria, who's going to help us get a better insight from a country perspective. Olutayo, great to see you. So look, let's kick off with the number one question from Nigeria's perspective, from a country perspective. Why is the dashboard important when it comes to making decisions about how to shape your food system?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So one of the things that has been happening in the nutrition space is asking that countries implement nutrition-sensitive actions, so including nutrition-sensitive agriculture, nutrition-sensitive water and sanitation programs. So Nigeria started to make the agriculture sector nutrition-sensitive after the 2013 Lancet series on maternal and child nutrition. And one of the first challenges we came up against was that we did not have data. So we were able to put experts together to come up with strategies of things we could do to make agriculture nutrition sensitive. And so a strategy was developed. But then when it came to implementing the strategy to say, these are the areas in the parts of the country in which we'll prioritize the different interventions, we did not have any data to guide us as to where the need was for the different interventions. And so we've been trying to do some research and get researchers to do this, and then the dashboard came up. And one of the things we found out was that a group of people, experts, have already sat down and conceptualized the entire food system from beginning to the end, identified indicators that could be used to assess each of the different dimensions of the food system, and then compiled all this information for different countries. And so for us, it was a game changer, basically, to say that what we were trying to spend money on, looking for expertise to do, it has already been done in a systematic way.
You needed data, and there was the data, like magic. That's brilliant. I know that Nigeria is piloting the subnational database, which we heard Ryan and Lawrence talking about. So that is really breaking down data into a regional and local level, is that it?
State level. So we have 36 states and federal capital territory, so like 37 states. So we are breaking this down into the 37 different sub locations in Nigeria.
Yeah. Yes. How does that help? Give us an example of how and where the data is useful.
Okay, so we know that even though we didn't have data about the food system characteristics, so we had data about some of the outcomes. So for instance, dietary diversity in women in 2018 ranged between 20% and 88% across the 37 states and capital territory. And so, and then nutrition also, undernutrition is high in some places, low in some places, and the same for overweight, obesity. And so we know that the food system characteristics are different. And so what we are trying to do is, when we have the subnational food systems dashboard, we're able to see the food system characteristics of different parts of the country. And so the way we've always targeted strategies is to base them on geopolitical zones. So a group of 6 states that we have based on their geography. But now we are seeing that increasingly, even within the same zone, states are different in their food systems characteristics. So now we want to group states by their food system patterns. And this is going to help a whole range of organizations, including the private sector. So it's going to help different organizations look at which states have the biggest needs and opportunities for the priority area of their organizations. And it also helps state governments to know which aspects of the food system do they need to strengthen the enabling environment for. And so this will help us more target resources more efficiently, as well as really address the biggest challenges for the food systems in each of our states. Thank you.
Does it always, one last question before I let you go, does it also help Nigeria, the government, decide who to work with, which sectors they need to engage in each different geopolitical zone?
Yeah, so that's one of the things we'll see, organizations and actors basically that need to be engaged to transform the food system in each of the different places. So not just for government, also for the private sector, researchers, donors, and other stakeholders.
Great, so you have a cross-sector response. Olautan, thank you very much indeed for that. Really interesting insight into how that can help policymaking in a specific country. So we've got more views from member states about the importance of the dashboard. Now, unfortunately, they can't be here in person, but they have very kindly taken the time to record their contributions. We're going to start with Germany. Christelle Weller-Molongwa, the head of the Division of Rural Development and Agriculture at the GIZ, that's the German Agency for International Cooperation. Let's hear from Germany first.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. Unfortunately, I cannot join today in person, but I am happy to send you this short video message. I'm going to respond to 3 questions. First question, why do I believe food system data is valuable and essential for food systems planning? Food systems data allows to identify strengths and weaknesses of our food systems. Thus, it can drive evidence-based decisions for more targeted interventions. Food systems play an important role to achieving the SDGs, but we can only foster change and make informed policy decisions when we are guided by evidences and data. Without data, we are flying blind. Second question, how relevant is data on food systems and nutrition for German government cooperation? The German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, under its special initiative One World No Hunger, has the ambition to increasingly base their policies and programs on evidence and to contribute to the generation of evidences, especially where gaps exist. A joint effort of the Ministry and European Commission in that regard is the program Knowledge for Nutrition, K4N. This program has a component called National Information Platforms for Nutrition, NIPINs. This component works first towards strengthening partner countries' information systems, and second, improve the analysis of the data. A second program, the Global Program, is active in 12 countries with a multi-sectoral and multi-level approach. It generates data on subnational level through standardized impact assessments, and the data is used for improved nutrition governance. Third question, would I recommend policymakers and others to use the food system dashboard? Where do I see need for improvement to address food systems governance issues in partner countries? Yes, definitely, I would recommend to use the food system dashboard. We perceive the dashboard as a great tool which is easy to understand. And I'm happy to see it being taken up by the UN Food System Summit as a game changer, which will lead to further developing it. This should especially focus on the inclusion of subnational data and the ownership of countries regarding data and use of the dashboards should be priority. This also includes guidance on how to use data for improved food system governance. The UN Food System Summit dialogues might even fuel countries' interests in creating their own dashboards by building on existing data initiatives in the countries. Thank you very much, and I wish you a fruitful discussion today, and I'm looking forward to continue to participate in the discussions.
That was wonderful. That was Christel Weller-Molongwe there from the GIZ. Thank you very much indeed for that contribution from Germany. I'm very happy now to introduce our next recorded contribution, Juan Roberto Mendoza, Monitoring and Evaluation Coordinator of the Secretariat of Food Security and Nutrition of Guatemala. Now, this message is in Spanish, so we invite you, if necessary, to switch to the English interpretation.
Given that a sustainable food system is important to ensure food and nutrition security for all people, without jeopardizing the economic, social, and environmental foundations of the country, the government of Guatemala, through the Food and Nutrition Security Secretariat of the Presidency, in coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is participating in the second National Dialogue of the Food Systems Summit 2021 of the United Nations. The Food and Nutrition Security Secretariat considers that the food systems dashboard is useful to learn about the challenges and opportunities Guatemala faces in order to plan actions focused on improving the country's food system. In the context of the Great National Crusade for Nutrition, the objective is to improve the health and inclusion of the Guatemalan population and address malnutrition in children under 5 years of age, women in shelters, rural and indigenous populations in poverty and extreme poverty. A survey is currently underway to establish the baseline for this strategy. The purpose of the baseline is to generate information that facilitates the monitoring and evaluation of results, indicators, and their impact on the Great National Crusade for Nutrition. The National Food and Nutrition Security Information System is a web platform that contains a series of dashboards that provide data on the country's food and nutrition security situation, the progress of the Great National Crusade for Nutrition, and the physical and financial execution of the annual operational plan for food and nutrition security. Since 2017, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, has been underway. IPC is a suite of tools and procedures based on international standards to classify the severity and magnitude of food insecurity. Through this analysis, up-to-date information on food and nutrition security is consolidated and presented in a simple and accessible way for decision-making. IPC is carried out under the direction of the Secretariat for Food and Nutritional Security with the technical and financial agreement of Progresan SICA, the global support unit of the IPC and the World Food Programme. Government institutions, international cooperation for education, and non-governmental organizations are participating in the process. Taking into consideration the words of our president, a country like Guatemala, capable of producing food products but held back by mismanagement of resources, it is an act of responsibility to join all actions that are generated to achieve the objectives of sustainable development.
The view from Guatemala there. Thank you very much indeed for that. Finally, I'm very happy to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Kate Schneider, Senior Research Data Analyst at the Berman Institute of Bioethics at the Johns Hopkins University. Kate, great to have you on the panel. Thanks for being here. So tell us about the Food Systems Countdown Report. This is an independent report counting down towards the transformation of global food systems. Tell us more about it.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to have a chance to share the Countdown Report with all of you. This is a new annual and peer-reviewed publication, and its goal is to monitor the world's food systems towards transformation. It's independent and multidisciplinary, a scientific collaboration of over 40 of the world's leading experts on food systems from 27 institutions and across all continents. They've organized their work in a very short amount of time. I'm really, really impressed. Into 5 areas which cover the key outcomes and cross-cutting issues that are pertinent to food systems. So these include diets, nutrition, and health, the environment and climate, livelihoods, poverty and equity, governance, and sustainability and resilience. And this year, a first report is going to come out that really sets the rationale and the architecture for this monitoring framework. And then going forward, it will annually publish a selected, curated, parsimonious set of the highest quality indicators. And it's also going to be working to improve indicator availability and quality to the best of its ability, and hopefully to inspire others to also improve on the science. And then the other additional contribution it will make is to analyze relationships between those indicators and in ways that can assess trade-offs and synergies. As you mentioned at the beginning, Shuli, this is really intended to be very complementary with the dashboard. So all of the new indicators that are created under the Countdown work will then be added to the dashboard so they can be accessible. And the dashboard has the other advantage of making a lot more data readily available. So many more indicators than the very small set of the most important that we report on in the Countdown. And the dashboard also provides easy to use visualization tools. And so they really go nicely together in terms of meeting the need of kind of a wide ranging set of audiences. So we hope that policymakers, for example, will see value in both. They might look to the Countdown report for key messages and guidance on the most important indicators to monitor in their own country, or where they might want to prioritize spending resources to collect new data and an assessment for how their country is performing. But then the dashboard is a much more accessible way for those same policymakers to go and interact with the data and to see other contextual factors and look at indicators that are of interest to them. The Countdown is also aimed at a scientific audience, and we're hoping that it will be accepted from a scientific journal where it's currently under review. Most of us who work in food systems constantly lament that we don't have the data that we want in order to make good decisions, and that is the motivation behind the dashboard and the motivation behind the Countdown. And we really hope that these two efforts can make dramatic change in that direction. And so a couple of things we hope the Countdown report can do that are novel is to do new science and inspire others to do new science, to create new metrics and close the gaps on a couple of the issues where the biggest gaps really exist. So for example, things like employment, governance, and sustainability. And we hope that the first report will come out this year around the Food Systems Summit.
So a scientific report, that's the first thing to say about it, very science-based, but very complementary to the dashboard and the information contained there. How does it benefit member states? I mean, this is all about driving policy making. It's all about driving change. So how can they use that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So what this report can do is provide evidence and guidance to policymakers and other food system actors about how they can shift towards sustainable and resilient food systems and what key indicators need to be monitored. We hope it speaks to multiple audiences and supports them in making critical decisions. So for example, we hope civil society and government actors use the data and evidence to design and advocate for and implement policies and programs that can actually drive change. But we also hope that it provides sort of a critical foundation for accountability. So the report itself can't be an accountability mechanism, but we really hope that it supports those who do hold people to account. So civil society and international institutions can use the evidence to hold governments accountable. But all of them, including governments, can also do similarly to hold the private sector accountable.
And obviously, as you've said, this is going to be the first of a series of annual reports. We're clearly counting down to the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. What do you want to see in subsequent reports?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we all share the same ultimate vision that we will see these indicators moving in the right direction. So we hope to see change where diets are healthier and production practices and supply chains move towards zero or negative environmental footprints. Wages go up, poverty goes down, and the protection of key rights for people who work in food systems are better protected and improved. And there's evidence of good governance in food systems, by which we mean coordinated and inclusive decision-making, which is backed by adequate resources and accountability, and that food systems overall are more sustainable and resilient. That's the holy grail. We all share that vision. But I think specifically when we think about what we want to see in this report in 2025 and 2030, I hope to see new indicators, and I really hope it's 2021. I hope in 4 years that we get to 2025 and we really can answer some of the questions that we can't right now. So a great example is that right now we can't answer the question of how many people earn their livelihoods in food systems. That seems like a pretty fundamental question. We can estimate the number specifically in agriculture and in certain aspects of food service, but there are so many jobs in food systems that are essentially unidentifiable in our current data. And so I hope we can improve on things like that in the next couple of years. And then by 2030, I think it's just important to point out that some of these indicators are slower moving. And I hope that, in a decade, we do see change on the ones that are typically monitored on decadal timescales. And those are more often the environmental indicators. And it's critical that we see those change.
I'm sure we'll talk further about the kind of changes that we're going to see for both the Countdown report and the food systems dashboard. For the moment, Kate, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to bring back all the panelists now, and we're going to widen out the discussion, and we're going to put some of your questions to our speakers. Great to have all of you in the hot seat there. Now, I've got questions of my own, but I'm going to kick off with one that's cropped up a couple of times on the in the Q&A boxes. And this is a very pertinent question, which was, we're talking about data and information. How do we ensure that the source of the information is reliable? How do we ensure that the information that is going on to the dashboard is accurate and comparable? Lawrence, let me start with you. And if any of the other speakers would like to add to that, then please do so.
Thank you, Shuli. Well, the data come from quality public sources. A lot of it comes from FAO, the UN, the World Bank, and then there are other sources that are highly reputable and have done their own quality screening. We do an additional quality screening for, not so much for rigor, although we do that, but mainly for relevance. The temptation is for any database or data platform to just throw tons and tons of data out there without much thought for the users. So we've been very careful about thinking which data, for the users we are targeting, what do they really need? What really is an impediment to action? And we've asked them this. We haven't just guessed what we think. We've asked them. So we've been very careful about the relevance as well as the rigor. But my other colleagues will be able to answer that question even better than me.
What's your view on, Rosalind, on the information that policymakers and researchers are using on the dashboard, and how do you, I guess it leads into the question of how do we update the information?
Yeah, exactly. I think also want to emphasize that, like Lauren said, we start with the best there is, or we try to start with that, but it's really also an iterative process to improve it over time, as some data, they have still core weaknesses, but also to recognize that and bringing these data together in the dashboard, we also see where are some of the critical gaps in terms of availability, but also in terms of quality. And I don't know if Ty could also speak to that. They brought different dietary data together, and they saw some discrepancies between those. And because of the process of the dashboard, they were able to capture that and to bring that also open and help push that process and move towards improving data. So I think the dashboard also plays a function in that, and the iterative process of that is really important. And the reach out to other groups out here, if there are better data available, we are very eager and to explore those and to improve it further over time.
I should mention here, for the benefit of panelists and the audience, that we've lost Ty Beale. Unfortunately, he had to go to another engagement. So, but the rest of you, I'm sure, can certainly provide the information that is needed effortlessly. I would like to ask a question of Olutayo, because when we talk about what kind of information is on the database and how we evolve the dashboard in the future, what is it that countries like Nigeria need to see on there? What would you like to see on there?
So thank you. I think one thing that will be great to see is to have benchmarks for each of the indicators that countries can aspire to say that for this indicator, when we get to this level, then we are doing well. Another thing it would be good to see on the dashboard is to have guidance, like a guidance document on how countries can actually use the data to describe and diagnose their food system. So there's already some information about actions that can be taken on the food system, but some guidance about linking deficiencies in the food system, some of these actions using the indicators, I think would be very helpful. Thank you.
Is that something one of the panelists would like to answer? Will there be a time when you can put benchmarks or game-changing solutions? I know solutions are rather different from actual just accessing information, but is that something that you see one day on the database?
Maybe Rosalind, Ro, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, in terms of so I think there's two parts of your question. There's the benchmarking and there are the game changers, right? So in terms of the benchmarking, yeah, we are also working in the diagnose to also compare where countries are to what are kind of low risk versus high risk situations for these to be. And I think that is also, I mean, there's a start of that, but will also change depending on the country and the context over time. The other part, yeah, the game changer. So we also have a complementary portal on game-changing solutions, a repository that helps to search those, and we are connecting this also to the dashboard, so that you can also search for this country. I have a major problem for dietary quality. You put these filters in there, and you get a list of game-changing solutions that are out there, or that and then you can see some examples in different contexts, or you can see for the specific setting. So I'll put in the chat also the link to that portal that we have been connecting to the dashboard, and that will further also yeah, will be expanding related to that. So yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of exciting times ahead and a lot of new information obviously coming on board. I wanted to ask a question about accountability. Kate, this might be something you can answer, because one of the things that the Countdown report talks about is assisting with accountability for governments. Why is it important to have accountability in this context?
That's a great question. Whenever goals are set, there has to be some sort of way to hold those in power accountable for actually meeting them. But I also think when it comes to food systems, there's this real tricky challenge, because the governance of food systems is widely spread, and there's a lot that international corporations are capable of influencing, and governments want to be able to hold companies accountable, and citizens and civil society organizations want to hold governments accountable. If we're going to see change, food systems are so complex. We have to have not only the shared vision about how to get there, but we have to have coordinated action along the way. And if there's no accountability mechanisms, it's really hard to drive that.
Another question from the audience. This is an interesting one. The dashboard obviously holds a huge amount of important information, and bluntly, Lawrence, I think this probably needs to be answered by you. Is it always going to be free, or could there at some point be a paywall for that?
We haven't thought about or talked about a paywall at all. I suppose for some commercial entities, we might consider in the future charging for some of that data, but it's difficult because it's all public data, all of it, and we are adding value to it by bringing it together, you know, sifting it, connecting it, giving it structure, making it user-friendly, linking it to diagnostics, to benchmarks, as our colleague said, and then linking that to solutions. So we're adding quite a bit of value to the raw material, but essentially is publicly available data. So I think we might set up a paywall. We haven't really talked about it. We have no plans for it. But if we ever did, I imagine it would be for commercial entities who can afford to pay for it. Because one of the things we have to think about is the sustainability of the system. We've been lucky to get public support from a number of governments and foundations, and I imagine that will continue for a few years, but it won't continue forever. So we need to find a sustainable solution that may be within the UN, or it could be some kind of sliding scale, pay for use business model. But we're not even thinking about that really. I wanted to come back to the accountability point because Kate's quite right. Accountability is very diffuse. But the other part of accountability is actually learning about what to do differently. And I think that's the dashboard and the countdown reports are great for that, because they say you got a problem here, or you're failing to do something here. You're pretty strong over here. How can we translate that strength over here into addressing this problem area over here? So accountability is always about two things. It's about saying, you're not doing what you said you would, or your actions are not having the impact you said they would, but here are some constructive ways in which you can maybe change that and turn it around.
Excellent.
I also have one more.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, Lawrence, thank you for that. And I'd just really like to build on that, because governments also want to make sure that what they're doing is having its intended effect. And so accountability, you know, has this connotation that it's others who do the accountability holding, but, you know, governments are just as interested in making sure that, you know, what they've invested in is achieving the results that they're hoping for. So accountability and data are also just critical inputs for monitoring and evaluation at a country level, and for, you know, sense making and checking to make sure that the policies are actually the right ones given the context.
And you know, surely. Oh, sorry, Kate.
Go ahead, Laura.
And surely, you know, the researchers are also accountable. They have to be accountable. Their job is not just to produce journal articles. Their job is to produce solutions. So I think the dashboard will help them produce solutions. And if they don't, you know, people like me will be saying, why aren't you?
Well, on the subject of producing solutions, there's been quite a lot of interest in the idea of a subnational dashboard. And a couple of questions have come in, which I'm going to direct towards you, Olatayo. They're along the same lines. So we've had a question from someone in Ethiopia who is hoping to have a food systems dashboard at a subnational level, and another question. And basically, the question boils down to how easy is it to use, to get the information? What are the challenges? Where does one start with subnational data?
Okay, thank you very much. I think one of the very key things to do in starting to work on a subnational dashboard is to get familiar with the global dashboard. And there's a place on the global dashboard where you can download the indicators that are included in that dashboard. So you can download all the indicators, the description of the indicators, and the data sources that from where the data for the dashboard itself was compiled. And so what we did was, after we downloaded the indicator metadata, we started to look at, for each of those indicators, we sourced for national surveys that are representative at the state level for the different indicators. And so we got some, and then the ones that we didn't have, we looked for data sources, so existing data sources that we could analyze to generate the indicators. And we are not able to generate all the indicators on the dashboard, but we're able to generate enough that we have something to describe each of the different sectors and most of the subsectors of the food system, which is very important. So I think right now we are around 50 or 60 of the indicators, and we're very happy with the progress. So it's important to familiarize yourselves with what is already, what is available on the dashboard and what is used there.
Olatunji, thank you very much indeed for that. We've touched on this already, but let's have some clarification. Who exactly is responsible for providing data to the dashboard? Are we talking about governments? Are we talking about businesses? Are we talking about international organizations? Who actually provides that info? We've talked about making sure it's reliable and accurate, but who comes up with it? Rosalind, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think, I mean, in a way, it depends actually a bit per indicator. Like some indicators are available, like FAO is managing those, but they are coming, of course, from the countries. I think also, I mean, ideally there is an increased country ownership of the data, and this will be also related to the more subnational dashboards. And I think it will be great also to help exchange what type of capacity is needed for that between and share lessons between different countries on that. I don't know if Laurence maybe wants to add to that.
Well, thanks, Ro. Just you know, in terms of who's responsible for providing it, I mean, the original sources are responsible for providing and keeping that data up to date and of good quality. We will keep checking the quality, but I guess the consortium is the group that's responsible for pulling it into one place and making sure it is updated. The data will be updated annually, but whether we update it in the dashboard is down to us. So we're accountable for that. We're accountable for the decision to include that variable and that indicator in the database. So I think Ro mentioned some piece of work that Ty, who was on our panel but dropped off, has been doing, looking at the two primary data sources for diet quality that exist in the world. And we've been agonizing a long time about which one to use. And so we commissioned Ty to do a piece of comparative work, and the results were really quite shocking. You know, if the two sources of data, both highly reputable organizations and institutions funded by well-funded by donors and foundations. You know, for example, if you want to know what Kenya is consuming in vegetables, one data source will say 30, I'm not making these numbers up, but they're roughly right. One source will say 30 grams a day, another source will say 90 grams a day. So these are not even close. So we've pointed out to those two data sources, for these countries, for these food commodities, the consumption levels are way out of line. Please figure out how to get your act together and make these two data sources tell us the same thing.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's so
quite scary.
I mean, even in journalism, you know, you get different sources telling you different things, and trying to sort of wade through that quagmire to come at the right answer is absolutely crucial when it comes to decision making. Is there, in future, we talk about algorithms and artificial intelligence, will there be help for countries on what is the right decision to make, do you think?
I can have a go at that again, unless somebody else would like to.
I mean, I suppose it's talking about new technology, new ways of analyzing data. So we're looking at the future. But once we have all this information, will countries be able to use AI or machine learning or a program which helps them arrive at a sensible policy?
Well, my view, I'll jump in in case anyone else wants to come in after me. My view is that you can only go so far with AI and machine learning. So one can imagine for a country or a province, you've got a profile of 250 indicators, and you've got 250 values for those indicators. You should be able to construct some kind of algorithm that says, if your profile across these 250 looks like this, then you want to zero in on these 10 actions or these 20 actions. But to me, that's just a starting point, because we know that policy is, it's about the art of the possible. And the art of the possible, what's possible, it has to be evidence-based, but it also has to be possible. So there's a lot of, while there's a lot of external and objective data and evidence that needs to be brought to bear, there's also a lot of intrinsic, tacit knowledge and experience and experiential learning, gut feeling, if you like, about seasoned politicians and policymakers who know what will work in a particular context. They know the politics, they know the capacity, and it's our job to give them the data and the evidence.
Okay, well, a question for Kate then off the back of that, which is another question from the audience. Great, we have all this information. We know there's a priority to transform food systems. We've got the SDGs, we've got the upcoming Food Systems Summit. How do you ensure governments are actually using the information to change their decision making?
If anyone else has the answer to that question, I'm pretty sure there would be lots of
that would be game changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the answering that question has been, something that I have thought about my entire career. And I think there are a number of mechanisms. Civil society often plays an important role by mediating between data and policymakers and translating the evidence into lobbying efforts for specific policies. But they have their own agendas, and they are not beholden the way that policymakers are to entire citizenry. And I think there are a number of ways. I think the international community plays a role. I think peer countries play a role with each other. And at the end of the day, most governments want to do more than they have the resources to do, particularly in low-income countries. And so I think my answer is probably unsatisfying, but if you look at high-income countries with a lot of resources, they do a slightly better job sometimes when there are the coincidence of interests between, all of their goals and what the data would support to use evidence. And many low-income countries, I think, would be very happy to do that if they had the resources. And so it really comes to this question of, how do we reduce poverty so that those countries have the tax base to support the use of data?
I know that both Rosalind and Lawrence want to jump in here. Rosalind, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry,
well,
I saw you raising your hand. Was I mistaken?
Yes, yeah. Well, we did a survey actually on that among decision makers and what facilitated them to use evidence, to use data in their decision process. And we had a kind of a whole list of things and kind of a lot like innovative decision support tools at this and the, and the thing that came up most was very basic. It was involving experts and direct communication and interaction with experts. So it's interesting now also with the pandemic, you see in many countries these kind of expert panels that directly advise the government and that help to digest the data and evidence on a daily basis. So it's, I think, like Kate says, governments want to use it, but there needs to be also this human factor still to help do that. And I think, like Lawrence said, it cannot all be done by artificial intelligence. And that was, it was a bit of a surprising answer that popped up like really highest among the answers of the decision makers, the policy makers that we surveyed. And that was for public policymakers as well as for private sector ones as well.
And you agree with that, Lawrence?
Yeah, I mean, there are three types of policy making. One is sort of evidence-driven policy making. Another one is policy-driven evidence making. where you know the answer, but you look for evidence to support your answer. And then there's no evidence policymaking. And there's combinations of all three of those, and it happens in every country. It certainly happens in the country I live in the UK. But I think what Rose says is really important. Think tanks, I always think, are the interface between action and evidence and science. And think tanks are really important for translating the what into the so what and the how for governments. So whatever we can do to support more think tanks to emerge in the places we work, the better. And I hope the dashboard itself will be a spur to generate more think tanks.
What's been the experience in Nigeria, Olutayo? Have you seen changes because of the information that's contained on the dashboard?
So thank you. One of the things that we are doing is to help make this data more available to the government. And so the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development is the agency that's gated the initial interest in the dashboard and has been supporting work on the subnational dashboard. But with the plans leading up to the Food Systems Summit, we now have the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, also interested in the subnational dashboard. And we're working on using the information from the subnational dashboard to develop a food systems action plan for Nigeria, to say that this is how we are going to transform our food systems. We've looked at the national data, but it's difficult because it's aggregated and it doesn't really speak to the situation in any one part of the country. And so that is why we are waiting for the subnational dashboard to be completed. And well, the data, we're not even waiting for the dashboard, we're just waiting to compile the data and describe the situation in each of the states, and then come up with this action plan. Over.
Also, thank you. We've had a question about the COVID-19 pandemic. We're of course reminded that everything that's been happening in the world over the last couple of years has been massively impacted by the pandemic. Does the data on the food system reflect on, is it a useful tool, for example, in a situation like a pandemic, on what areas need to be bolstered or looked at in the wake of something like the global pandemic? Does it get influenced by external factors like that? Lawrence.
I think the pandemic exposed vulnerabilities that were there in the food system. So if the dashboard is good at exposing vulnerabilities in food systems, it tells you in advance of a shock like COVID where your vulnerabilities are. So in that sense, in a getting ready sense, yes, it's quite helpful and quite valuable. And I believe Ro and Kate, and we are developing we're going to be incorporating a resilience indicator, or a series of resilience indicators. So I think that will be helpful. In terms of tracking the impacts of, no, it's not very good, and that's because there isn't a very good way of tracking the impacts of COVID-19 on any sort of food system outcomes. And that's because, unlike COVID data, which are reported daily, the impacts of the pandemic are on food are reported once every 6 months at the moment. And so in the aftermath of the lockdown and the pandemic, they always say that truth is the victim, truth is the first casualty of war. Well, evidence and data were the first casualty, not the first casualty, maybe the second casualty of the pandemic lockdown. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what was going on with food prices, with kids missing meals, with diet quality, with imports and exports. We just didn't know what was going on. So I think the pandemic and future shocks that are going to be happening is a real wake-up call to the sector to say your data collection has to be more dynamic and more real-time. And when it is, then we will pick up on it. And I hope maybe we can be at the cutting edge of that movement.
Yeah, and that's pretty much a call to action for countries to enable them to use the dashboard more effectively. Lawrence, I know that you've got to get off to another meeting. We are really grateful to have you here with us for this long. Perhaps you'd like to finish up just before you go by giving some final thoughts, a key message about the food systems dashboard?
It's the message I always say, Shuli. Look at it, look at the dashboard, use it, tell us what you think of it, tell us how to improve it, and and share it, but most importantly, act on it. If those two teachers in Iowa and Nairobi were using it to teach their 11-year-old students about their food systems, anyone can use this dashboard to learn about your food systems and learn about the things that are great about it and the things that are not so great about it. And it's for businesses, governments, civil society. So, it will only get better once it's used and we get the information back to make it better. One of the questions was, isn't all this data going to lead to paralysis analysis? And my answer in the Q&A was, it's exactly what we're intending to do is exactly the opposite. I'm so tired of being on panels and listening to policymakers and development partners saying we're not going to do anything because we don't have the data. First of all, I don't think that's the right approach. I think you don't have to have data to tell you what to do. You can construct plausible theories of change that you can then test. Inaction has a cost. The wrong action has a cost. Politicians and policymakers get paid to figure out the cost-benefit ratio of those. But having the data is not the cure-all for action. But an absence of data is surely a kill-all for action. We must make sure that people have the data, and it's not an excuse for inaction. Can it be used to overcomplicate things? Yes. And our job as the custodians of this dashboard is to make it as easy to use and to make the links to action as nuanced but as straightforward as possible. So I'm very sorry I have to leave you, Shuli, but thank you so much for moderating
that was great.
And thank you, Pam, for being so brilliant. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking part on this panel, Lawrence. Great to see you. Have a good day. Lawrence Flood there, the Chief Executive of GAIN. So we've had a lot of questions from the audience. I think we've got through quite a few of those questions. I just want to let the audience know that if there are any questions that you either missed the answer or haven't had answered, they will all be answered on GAIN's website, and you'll get a link to this recording later on as well. So thank you for the panelists for answering those questions. What I'd like to do is invite each of them now to give a final sum up about what they're most excited about the dashboard and why it's so important, and perhaps a call to action for countries. And no particular order, but let's start with Rosalind. Let's start with you. What's the final message you would like to leave the audience with today?
Yeah, thanks. It's and it's a bit difficult to go after Lawrence for that question, because I think he gave some really good points already. Personally, I was also really kind of encouraged to see that kids from 11 years old were using it, and I think it's play around with it. It's actually a lot of fun to see all these different data sets come together. So also see the fun of it, and I think that having fun with it also helps us to act upon it. So yeah,
really, kids as young as 11 have been using it, so it's really accessible for even young people, and they want to use it. They want the information.
Yeah, they used it. That was one of the submissions to the competition. They used it for one of their homeworks, kind of one of their projects. So, and I think, yeah, they had fun with it. So I think also play with it like kids, because that will also help us to act. I always act more when I actually enjoy things. So yeah, and maybe that's my final comment or suggestion, to encourage to have fun with it, to play around with it, because it's really it's set up in a quite fun way. Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely, yes. I have looked at it, and it is really fun to use. It's really interactive, and you can look at so many different indicators and how they reflect on each other. And that is a really strong message for any researchers or policymakers out there. Kids as young as 11 are using this, so you have no excuse. Rosalind, that's great. Thank you so much indeed for that.
Thank you very much.
Olatayo, what would you like to say from your point of view as a final thought?
Well, I'm just going to sort of repeat what has already been said. For us, we found out that the dashboard is a great way of understanding territorial food systems without undertaking expensive research. So I would encourage anyone who is interested in any aspect of the food system at all, from input to consumption and health outcomes, to play around with the dashboard. Pretty much go in there, look at the data, look at how you can link indicators together and make sense of what is happening in your country, or compare your countries with other countries. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll see the growth of subnational databases as well, so we can get that the snapshot view on a state level as you are in Nigeria right now. Olatayo, thank you very much indeed for that. And Kate, what's your final message about the transformation of food systems?
I think I'm really excited about the momentum behind the Food Systems Summit, and I really think that it is going to create this energy, and if we can sustain that and being able to go to the dashboard and look at indicators in the moment that a person is inspired, regardless of where they sit, I really think that that can help sustain the momentum. And you asked me in the original interview portion of our webinar today what I hope to see in 2030. And I think the other thing that inspires me is I really hope that we get to 2030 and we look back and we see how instrumental the dashboard and the countdown report have been in keeping this momentum going.
I think that's really important. There is a lot of energy right now. And the kind of information and factors and indicators that we're getting on the dashboard, and we look at the countdown report, there is a lot of momentum, particularly in the run up to the Food Systems Summit, and it would be brilliant if we could keep that going. And of course, obviously, thanks to the work that you guys are doing, hopefully that will be the case. Thank you to all my panelists for taking part on this. It's been great finding out more about the food systems dashboard and how that can help drive changes in food systems at both the national level and at state level. I want to thank the audience for taking part in the discussion and raising those very pertinent questions for the panelists. A couple of people have asked, and I will say to you now, yes, there will be links sent out to everybody who registered for this webinar. You will have access to all the resources, all the slides that you saw, all the information, the link to the food systems dashboard. We will also be hoping that you join us for our next GAIN webinar. That is on Monday, the 7th of June, which is World Food Safety Day. So we're going to be talking about that. The registrations are open now. The link will be shared or has been shared in the chat. So it just leaves it to me to say thank you once again to all our speakers, and have a very good rest of the day.